Imagine pulling a heavily armed, like a completely military-grade fast attack boat entirely out of the water.
Right.
You strap it to a heavy-duty transport trailer, you drive it miles inland away from any port, right? And you park it underneath the thick, dense canopy of this massive tree.
You're trying to completely camouflage it.
Exactly. You've taken it totally out of its operational environment. You think you're, entirely off the grid.
Yeah.
But an American drone still finds you, paints the target, and just obliterates it.
It's a terrifying level of precision, honestly. It completely shatters the illusion of safe havens in modern warfare.
It really does. And that image, a naval asset destroyed while hiding under a tree, that really sets the stage for what we are doing today. So welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We have spent the last few days poring over a massive stack of recent broadcast transcripts, military briefings, intelligence reports. And our mission today is to unpack the reality of Operation Epic Fury. This is the unprecedented, highly coordinated, and just rapidly escalating military campaign currently being waged by the United States and Israel against Iran.
And right at the top, we really need to incredibly transparent about the source material we're working with here.
Yeah, absolutely.
The broadcast transcripts and reports we've aggregated, they are not sterile academic documents.
Oh.
They contain highly politically charged commentary. We are seeing intensely passionate perspectives from both left-wing and right-wing viewpoints. They reflect the very deep, very real divisions in how this conflict is being perceived and, frankly, weaponized domestically.
Right, and I'm really glad you brought that up because I want to make it crystal clear to you, the listener, we are not taking sides here.
Not at all.
We aren't endorsing any of the political viewpoints, the policy positions, or the partisan framing presented in these sources. Our only goal today is to act as your impartial guides.
Yeah.
We're going to strip away the rhetoric, synthesize the raw facts, break down the military updates, and decode the geopolitical maneuvers so that you can fully grasp exactly what is happening and, more importantly, why it matters to you.
Because the truth is, to understand a war of this magnitude, you have to look far past the day-to-day explosions on the evening news.
Yeah.
You have to examine the deeply interconnected global systems. The military supply chains, the global energy markets, the shifting political alliances. All of these are currently buckling under immense stress.
Okay, so let's unpack this because the sheer scale of Operation Epic Fury is, staggering almost feels like an understatement.
It really does.
We are not talking about a regional skirmish or a proportional tit-for-tat exchange here. We are looking at a conflict that is actively dictating the cost of global energy. It is fundamentally reshaping historical European and Gulf state alliances.
Yeah.
And it's triggering entirely new homeland security threats right here at home. But to understand how a bomb dropped in the Middle East changes the price of an Amazon delivery or your winter heating bill, we have to start on the ground. We need to understand the battlefield blueprint.
Right. And what the compiled intelligence reveals is a highly specific, totally unprecedented division of labor between the United States and Israel.
Okay.
They're fighting the same enemy, but they are fighting two entirely different wars.
That's fascinating. Let's look at the U.S. side of the equation first. The Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, has been giving these briefings, and he states that the U.S. military is systematically dismantling Iran's war machine.
Yeah.
But it's the numbers that are just difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
They're reporting that over 7,000 targets have been struck across Iran's military infrastructure.
We really need to pause on that number.
Yeah.
Because 7,000 targets is not an incremental escalation. In military terms, striking 7,000 distinct targets requires a continuous, overwhelming projection of both air and naval power that very few nations on Earth could even attempt, let alone sustain. We were talking about thousands of individual sorties, massive logistical supply chains for jet fuel and munitions, and a persistent satellite and drone surveillance network. You are systematically deleting everything from coastal radar installations and ballistic missile silos to, the mundane logistics hubs that keep an army fed and armed.
Right. And the naval component is what really jumped out at me in the transcripts. The reports state the U.S. has eliminated 11 submarines.
Which is a catastrophic blow to any nation's maritime power projection.
But how do they even do that? The submarines are designed specifically not to be found. Right?
Yeah, it requires an incredibly complex web of anti-submarine warfare tactics.
Okay.
The U.S. relies on a combination of acoustic sensors dropped from maritime patrol aircraft, underwater sonar arrays, and nuclear attack submarines trailing Iranian vessels from the exact moment they leave port.
Oh, wow. So they're just tailing them.
Exactly. The moment hostilities commence, the U.S. already knows exactly where those assets are. But as you mentioned with the boat under the tree, they aren't just hitting the big, slow-moving targets in the water.
Right. So explain the mechanics of that to me. Because finding a boat under a tree sounds like finding a needle in a haystack, if the haystack was the size of a country.
Yeah.
How does the U.S. military actually see through the canopy?
It comes down to technologies like synthetic aperture radar, or SAR.
SAR. Okay.
Unlike a standard optical camera that needs daylight and clear skies, SAR actively bounces microwave signals off the ground.
Okay.
These signals can penetrate cloud cover, weather, and yes, even certain types of foliage. Furthermore, they use thermal imaging.
All because of the heat.
Right. A metal boat on a trailer absorbs and radiates heat differently than the dirt and wood around it. So to a drone operator staring at a screen thousands of miles away, that camouflaged boat glows like a neon sign.
That is wild.
It demonstrates that the U.S. isn't just hitting known static bases, they are persistently hunting dynamic concealed targets.
And to hunt those targets, they're changing their posture entirely. The reports note that the U.S. is bringing in A-10 Warthogs and Apache helicopter gunships on the southern flank, and they're pushing much deeper and further east into Iranian airspace.
Which tells us a lot about the state of Iran's air defenses.
How so?
You don't send in A-10s or Apaches, which fly relatively low and slow compared to fighter jets, unless you have already completely dismantled the enemy's surface-to-air missile networks.
Oh, so they'd be sitting ducks otherwise.
Exactly. The presence of those specific aircraft means the U.S. has achieved total air superiority. They are now conducting close air support missions, actively sweeping the terrain for moving targets.
But for the targets that aren't moving, like the ones that are buried,
Yeah.
the U.S. is using a completely different tool. The transcripts mention the deployment of massive 5,000-pound bombs.
Yes, the bunker busters.
Right.
These are vital because Iran has spent decades digging its most critical nuclear and missile infrastructure deep into the sides of mountains, under layers of reinforced concrete.
So how does a bomb actually get through a mountain without just blowing up on the surface? I mean, rock is rock.
It's a marvel of physics and engineering, really. These weapons, like the GBU-28, are essentially massive, heavy darts made from hardened artillery barrels.
Okay.
They use sheer kinetic energy falling from thousands of feet to punch through the earth and concrete. But the genius is in the fuse.
The fuse?
Yeah, the fuse is quote-unquote smart. It can literally count the layers of concrete it is breaking through.
You're kidding.
No, it delays the actual detonation until it senses it has breached the final ceiling and entered the hollow cavern of the bunker. Only then does the 5,000-pound warhead explode.
Wow.
And that contains the massive pressure wave inside the bunker to ensure total destruction.
Okay, so if we zoom out on the U.S. strategy, it's brute force. Total air superiority, overwhelming kinetic energy, wiping out the hardware.
Exactly. The U.S. is focused on the physical capability to wage war. But this brings us to the division of labor. Because while the U.S. is dismantling the hardware, Israel is focused entirely on the software of the regime.
The human element.
Precisely. Israel's objective, as outlined in the analysis, is systemic leadership decapitation. They are hunting the individuals who operate the machinery.
And the transcripts name specific groups here. We're talking about the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the Basij militia.
Right.
For the listener who might not be familiar, the Basij are essentially the regime's internal paramilitary enforcers. They're the ones deployed to the streets to violently repress civilian protests.
Yeah, and Israel is targeting the command structure of these organizations, along with the broader law enforcement and intelligence infrastructure.
Okay.
The reports detail that top leaders have already been eliminated, including Ali Larijani, a massive figure in Iranian politics, as well as the intelligence minister and top Basij commanders.
And the mechanism here is vastly different from a 5,000-pound bomb.
Very different.
The sources say Israel is able to do this because they leverage what analysts call exquisite human intelligence.
Human intelligence, or humani, is arguably the hardest asset to cultivate in espionage. It means Israel has deep, active networks of local informants living and working within the Iranian population.
Like actual citizens?
People inside the government, inside the military bases, providing real-time coordinates. The U.S. military doesn't need to try and build that capability on the fly because Israel has been meticulously building it for decades.
Right.
Israel's stated goal isn't just to blow up a runway. It's to sever the regime's central nervous system and set the conditions for a complete internal collapse.
So to use an analogy, it's like a massive coordinated building demolition. The U.S. is the crew bringing in the bulldozers and wrecking balls, smashing the foundation and the load-bearing walls.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Israel's like a highly specialized strike team, moving room by room, specifically taking out the building's management so no one can order the repairs.
That perfectly captures the synergy of the operation.
Okay, but here is where I have to throw a flag on the play. Because I'm reading these briefings from Pete Hegseth, and he's projecting this overwhelming aura of success. 7,000 targets hit, submarines destroyed, leadership wiped out.
Yeah.
But if the U.S. and Israel have supposedly decimated the foundation and the management, why am I still seeing rockets on the news?
Right.
The transcripts make it undeniably clear that the incoming fire from Iran hasn't stopped. If we're executing this perfect division of labor, why are civilians still dying?
That is the grim reality of asymmetric warfare, and it exposes the flaw in measuring success purely by the number of targets destroyed.
How so?
When you are dealing with a nation that has spent 40 years stockpiling weapons, destroying 90% of a massive arsenal still leaves a lethal 10%.
Yeah.
And when that remaining 10% is in the hands of a desperate, cornered force that knows it is losing, they stop caring about military strategy and start focusing on inflicting maximum pain.
And the human toll of that remaining 10% is horrific. The reports detail that Iran, despite having its conventional military dismantled, is actively firing cluster munitions.
And we should explain the mechanics of a cluster munition because it fundamentally changes the nature of the threat.
Yeah, please do.
A standard missile hits a single point. A cluster munition is basically a flying cargo container. It opens in midair, miles above the ground, and scatters dozens or hundreds of smaller, explosive bomblets over a footprint the size of several football fields.
And because of that wide, unpredictable dispersion, Israeli military officials in these broadcasts are explicitly calling the use of these weapons a war crime when fired towards civilian population centers.
Because they possess zero precision, they blanket an entire area. And worse, many of the bomblets fail to detonate on impact, essentially turning them into unexploded landmines waiting for a civilian to step on them days or weeks later.
And no defense system, not even the Iron Dome or David's sling, is 100% airtight against that kind of scattershot barrage.
No, it's nearly impossible.
The transcripts detail some genuinely heartbreaking realities on the ground right now. In the West Bank, 3 Palestinian women were killed instantly while they were simply sitting inside a hair salon when part of an Iranian ballistic missile slammed into their neighborhood.
It's awful.
Another person, a foreign worker, was killed in central Israel.
It highlights the entirely indiscriminate nature of Iran's retaliation. The weapons do not distinguish between a military airbase, a civilian business, or the nationality of the victims.
It's even reaching the most historically and religiously significant areas on the planet. The reports note that shrapnel rained down near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre inside Jerusalem's Old City.
Wow.
As a direct result, Israeli police have been forced to close all the holy sites across Jerusalem to protect the public. So you have this paradox. We're fighting a high-tech war with stealth jets and smart fuses, but the physical hardware falling from the sky is destroying the most basic, fundamental aspects of civilian life and religious observance.
And this indiscriminate retaliation is a massive warning sign. Because while the immediate physical destruction is devastating locally, the fact that Iran is lashing out wildly tells us something critical about their next move. If they can't win the shootout in the sky, they are going to look for the global economy's Achilles heel.
Which brings us to the second major theater of this conflict. Because the crosshairs have officially moved away from military bases, the new target is the world's most vulnerable resource energy.
This is a classic, albeit terrifying, escalation ladder. When a nation-state realizes its military hardware is outmatched, it transitions to economic warfare.
And here's exactly how that transition played out, according to the timeline in the transcripts. Early in the morning, Israeli jets struck a location called the South Pars gas field, located in the Persian Gulf.
Right.
In immediate response to that specific strike, Iran retaliated massively by targeting energy facilities across the entire surrounding region. They hit a Saudi refinery sitting on the Red Sea. They targeted major oil and gas fields in the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait. And most significantly, They launched ballistic missiles directly at the Ras Laffan facility in Qatar.
We need to put a pin in this and really examine the gravity of these specific locations, because most people don't realize how entirely dependent the modern world is on these few square miles of infrastructure.
Let's start with South Pars. What makes it so important?
The South Pars gas field is, without exaggeration, the single largest natural gas reserve on the planet. It accounts for roughly 10% of the entire world's proven natural gas reserves.
10% in one location.
Yes. To put that in perspective, the gas trapped in the rock formations of South Pars is estimated at 1,800 trillion cubic feet.
I can't even.
That is enough usable energy to supply the entire world's natural gas needs, every stove, every heating unit, every gas-fired power plant on Earth for 13 straight years.
Okay, that scale is almost impossible to visualize.
And crucially, it is Iran's primary source of domestic energy. It's the lifeblood of their internal economy. It's how they generate their electricity and heat their citizens' homes. But here's the geopolitical hook. South Pars is a shared field.
Yeah.
The geological formation crosses international maritime borders. Iran controls one half the field, and Qatar controls the other half, which they call the North Field.
And that explains the retaliation. Israel hits Iran's side of the field, so Iran immediately turns around and fires missiles at Qatar's infrastructure.
Exactly. And the target in Qatar, the Ras Laffan facility, isn't just a random refinery. It is the absolute bottleneck of global energy. Ras Laffan is the world's largest producer of liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
Let's break that down for the listener. What is the difference between regular natural gas and LNG, and why does it actually matter?
Natural gas, in its raw state, is a vapor. You can easily move it through pipelines across a continent, like from Russia to Europe. But you can't put a vapor on a ship and send it across the ocean. It takes up way too much space. So at a facility like Ras Laffan, they use massive, incredibly complex refrigeration trains to cool the gas down to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
At that extreme temperature, the gas turns into a liquid, shrinking its volume by 600 times. You can then pump that cryogenic liquid onto specialized insulated ships and send it anywhere in the world.
And the reports note that the vast majority of Qatar's LNG ships directly to Asia, heavily supplying the manufacturing bases and energy grids of China, India, and Japan.
So when we look at Iran's strategic playbook here, it is highly calculated. They know they cannot compete with the U.S. Navy or the Israeli Air Force.
Yeah.
So instead, they are hitting these massive, fragile, soft targets, the refineries and the LNG cooling trains. They're essentially putting a gun to the head of the global energy market.
And the global market blinked immediately. The transcripts note that the moment these strikes occurred, European gas prices spiked by a staggering 30%.
Yeah.
Oil prices surged across the board.
And a 30% spike isn't just a number on a trading floor. If that spike sustains into the winter, you are talking about massive inflation for basic heating, factories in Germany shutting down because the energy cost exceeds the value of the goods they produce, and a profound strain on global shipping.
And this is where it hits home for the listener, because the reports point out a massive shift in the U.S. economy. Right now, the United States is the world's top LNG exporter.
Which is a complete paradigm shift from just a decade ago.
Right. The data shows that back in 2016, U.S. LNG exports were essentially zero. But thanks to the shale revolution, the U.S. now leads the world, which means the U.S. economy is now deeply, inextricably tied to these global energy shifts.
Exactly.
If Qatar's Ras Laffan facility goes offline due to an Iranian missile strike, the global demand for U.S. LNG skyrockets overnight.
Which sounds good for American energy companies, but for the American consumer, it means domestic natural gas prices could surge as suppliers export their product to the highest bidders overseas. Everything is a fragile, deeply interconnected web. And striking a massive node like South Pars or Ras Laffan sends violent tremors through that entire web.
Which makes the political reaction to these strikes absolutely fascinating. Yeah. We have to talk about former President Trump's reaction, because he took to Truth Social immediately after the South Pars strike.
The rhetoric he used was incredibly severe, even by historical standards.
According to the broadcast transcripts, Trump expressed deep anger at Israel's initial strike on the South Pars field. He claimed that the United States knew absolutely nothing about the operation beforehand, and he explicitly stated that Qatar was an innocent party that shouldn't be dragged into the crossfire.
Yeah.
But then, he issued an unprecedented threat to Iran.
It was a threat of total economic annihilation.
He stated that if Iran unwisely decides to attack Qatar again, the United States with or without Israel's consent, will massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars field at an amount of strength and power that Iran has never seen or witnessed before.
We really need to unpack the paradox of that threat, because on one hand, it's classic deterrence theory. You threaten an unacceptable cost to prevent an action. But on the other hand, look at what the threat actually entails.
Right. Let's play that scenario out. We just established that South Pars contains 1,800 trillion cubic feet of gas, equating to 10% of global supply.
Yeah.
If the U.S. military were to intentionally, massively blow up the entirety of that field, I mean, practically speaking, how does the global economy even survive that kind of deliberate infrastructural destruction?
The short answer is it would trigger an economic crisis unlike anything we've experienced in the modern era. The transcripts include analysis suggesting that destroying the field's infrastructure to that degree would mean decades of effort just to cap the wells and attempt to recover the field, let alone produce from it.
You're talking about removing 10% of the world's natural gas supply overnight.
The shockwave would be catastrophic. The cost of European heating would become untenable, potentially freezing vulnerable populations. Asian manufacturing would face crippling blackouts, which would instantly break the global supply chains for everything from electronics to pharmaceuticals.
It's the ultimate double-edged sword. You permanently cripple your adversary's domestic economy by taking away their energy, but you essentially crater the global economy in the process. It's a terrifying game of chicken with the global thermostat.
And that looming threat, the terrifying possibility of an energy-driven economic crash, is exactly what is forcing the hands of countries thousands of miles away to suddenly get involved in this conflict.
Which brings us to the diplomatic pivot. Because as it turns out, the fear of freezing in the dark is a pretty strong motivator for political action.
Economic survival always overrides political ideology when the stakes get high enough.
Exactly. The transcripts detail a major, highly unexpected development on the international stage. A coalition of European allies, specifically the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, along with Japan, have officially stepped off the sidelines.
This is huge.
Yeah, they issued a brand new joint statement officially committing their naval forces to help ensure safe passage for shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
We need to visualize the Strait of Hormuz to understand why this is the flashpoint. It is a narrow waterway between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. At its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are only 2 miles wide in either direction.
2 miles.
Yes. And through that tiny 21-mile-wide geographical choke point flows roughly 20% of the world's entire oil consumption and massive amounts of the LNG we just talked about.
Unbelievable.
If Iran decides to aggressively mine that strait or use their coastal anti-ship missiles to target commercial tankers, the energy simply cannot leave the Gulf. It's a cork in the bottle of the global economy.
And the analysis of this sudden European intervention in the sources is really sharp and, frankly, a bit critical of Europe. General Jack Keane was quoted extensively on this dynamic. He pointed out the deep historical frustration the U.S. military has had with these specific European nations.
Yeah.
He characterized them as social democracies that, for decades following the Cold War, absolutely gutted their own national defense budgets.
They banked on the quote-unquote peace dividend, choosing to rely almost entirely on the U.S. Navy to secure global sea lanes while they redirected those funds.
Right. Keane noted they prioritized funding massive domestic entitlement programs over military readiness. And he pointed out that when the U.S. previously asked for naval assistance in the region, these same nations essentially stiffed the requests. They wanted the benefits of global trade without paying the security premium.
But the calculus has changed violently. As Keane observed, they are now being embarrassed into stepping up.
And the panic is spreading beyond the major powers. The transcripts mention that even smaller nations like Estonia and Finland are stepping up to offer whatever naval assistance they can provide. But what I find fascinating is the intense political dilemma this creates for these European governments back home.
It's an agonizing position for leadership in Berlin, London, or Paris. As the broadcasts point out, many of these European countries have domestic, heavily left-wing political bases that are currently highly critical of Israel, its military campaigns, and its policies in Gaza.
Right.
The political pressure from voters and parliament members for these leaders to distance themselves from the U.S.-Israeli operation is immense. Protests in the streets, threats of votes of no confidence.
But then reality knocks on the door.
Exactly. The prime minister or chancellor walks into a briefing room and is handed a piece of paper showing a 30% spike in natural gas prices, with projections that it will double or triple if the Strait of Hormuz closes. They know that if they don't deploy their navies to help the U.S. keep that strait open, their economies will crash. The cost of living will skyrocket, factories will lay off thousands of workers, and the government will be blamed anyway.
So they're being forced to prioritize basic mathematical economic survival over the intense domestic political pressures of their voting base. It's a stunning pivot.
It is.
But Europe is thousands of miles away. What about the neighborhood directly surrounding Iran? The Gulf states are literally right in the line of fire of Iran's retaliation. How are they reacting?
The reaction from the Gulf states has been furious, and more importantly, it has been unified, which, historically speaking, is quite rare in that region.
The transcripts highlight a very stark statement from Saudi Prince Faisal bin Farhan. He declared that whatever small amount of trust existed between Saudi Arabia and Iran prior to this conflict is now completely shattered. Yeah, he stated unequivocally that the Saudis are going to use every single lever they possess, political, economic, diplomatic, and otherwise, to stop these Iranian attacks. And crucially, the intelligence reporting suggests Riyadh is actively considering offensive military action against Iran.
Which is a massive escalation from a country that usually prefers to fight via proxies or economic pressure.
And the United Arab Emirates issued a similarly blistering statement. Following the Iranian missile strikes on their oil fields, the UAE ministry didn't mince words. They officially labeled the Iranian actions a terrorist attack and a direct threat to global security.
Right.
And it's worth noting that the visual the reports painted. Emirati air defense batteries were actively firing into the sky, shooting down incoming Iranian ballistic missiles and drones while these diplomatic meetings were taking place.
So if we analyze the strategic fallout of this next strait, Iran launched these strikes on the Saudi and Emirati oil fields to cause economic pain, hoping to create leverage and force a ceasefire. But the expert analysis in these transcripts points out a profound, almost tragic irony for Tehran. Iran's aggressive, indiscriminate retaliation against its neighbors is rapidly forging the exact geopolitical nightmare they have always feared most.
Right. By attacking Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait simultaneously, Iran is inadvertently acting as the ultimate unifier. They are creating a highly cohesive Middle Eastern alliance against themselves. One of the analysts in the broadcast referred to it as the potential for an Abraham Accords 2.0.
For context, the original Abraham Accords were a series of treaties normalizing diplomatic and economic relations between Israel and several Arab nations, prioritizing shared economic growth over historical grievances.
Right.
And Abraham Accords 2.0 in this context means a fully unified military and economic bloc of Gulf states, openly aligned with U.S. and Israeli security interests, bonded together entirely by the shared existential threat of an unpredictable, aggressive Iran.
It would fundamentally and permanently reshape the balance of power in the Middle East. It would isolate Iran completely.
Is the ultimate strategic backfire.
So externally, Iran is looking at a newly unified, heavily armed, and intensely hostile front. But while that geopolitical wall is closing in from the outside, the situation inside Iran's borders is reportedly deteriorating into an unprecedented level of chaos and public rebellion. Let's shift our focus and look at the view from inside Iran.
The intelligence assessments discussed in the broadcasts paint a remarkably vivid picture of a regime experiencing a catastrophic internal collapse.
The specific phrase used by intelligence officials was intact but tattered. There is a massive leadership vacuum. We talked earlier about Israel's decapitation strategy. It has been so effective at removing top officials, generals, and ministers that the intelligence suggests the regime is no longer functioning as a cohesive state. They're now operating in disconnected silos.
When a rigid, top-down authoritarian structure where every decision must be vetted by loyalty to the supreme leader suddenly loses its apex leadership, panic sets in.
Makes sense.
The remaining regional commanders or sub-factions lose communication with the center. They often retreat into self-preservation mode, operating entirely independently because the central command and control apparatus has been severed.
And the rumors swirling around the very top of that command structure are wild. The broadcasts report these widespread, albeit unconfirmed, rumors circulating heavily among the Iranian diaspora regarding the newly appointed supreme leader.
The nature of the rumors is highly revealing, regardless of their factual accuracy.
The rumors claim that the new supreme leader had his foot blown off in a recent targeted strike. They claim he is heavily sedated, to the point where he doesn't even realize he is supposedly in charge of the country, and there are whispers that he may have been secretly flown out of the country to Moscow to recover in a secure Russian hospital.
Again, while these are unconfirmed rumors, in an authoritarian state, perception is reality. The mere existence and rapid, uncontrolled spread of these rumors indicate a complete loss of faith in the regime's invulnerability. The mythology of the supreme leader, that he is divinely protected and holds absolute power, is breaking down in real time.
And we are seeing that breakdown physically manifest on the streets of Tehran. The transcripts detail some incredible, almost surreal scenes from the recent Persian New Year celebration, the Fire Festival.
Historically, this festival is a massive flashpoint. It's a time when the regime deploys its security forces en masse to heavily suppress public gatherings and enforce strict behavioral codes.
But this year was entirely different. Iranian citizens, seeing the weakness of the regime, flooded the streets by the thousands to celebrate openly. And in a stunning reversal of power dynamics, the report stated it was the regime's own security forces who were seen running away, hiding in alleys, terrified of incoming drones and blasts.
It represents the complete psychological collapse of the regime's internal security apparatus. The Basi militia, the very enforcers we discussed Israel targeting earlier, have been so heavily degraded by precision strikes that the remaining foot soldiers are terrified. The aura of fear they relied on is gone, and the public is actively defying them.
It goes beyond defiance. The broadcasts note that a significant number of Iranian citizens are actively acting as informants for Israeli intelligence.
Wow.
The domestic hatred for the government is so deep and the desire for freedom so strong that the people themselves are identifying regime officials, providing locations, and essentially guiding the strikes. It's gotten so bad for the regime's leadership that they have resorted to threatening their own police forces.
Which is the absolute definition of a regime in a death spiral.
The transcripts state the regime is creating blacklists. They are explicitly telling their own municipal police and security forces that if they refuse to go out into the streets and violently suppress the civilian population, they will be placed on this list and executed by the state.
It is a regime cannibalizing its own enforcement mechanisms just to survive the week. When you have to hold a gun to the head of the man holding the gun, you have lost control of the state.
But this brings me to a really difficult question.
Okay.
We've painted a picture of a dying regime. The central nervous system is destroyed, the leadership is either dead, sedated, or hiding, and the military is operating in these disconnected, terrified silos. On paper, that sounds like a victory. But doesn't that actually make them more dangerous in a very unpredictable way?
How do you mean?
I mean, how do you negotiate an off-ramp? If the U.S. and Israel decide they've achieved their objectives and want to establish a ceasefire, who do they call?
Oh, I see.
If there's literally no one answering the phone who actually has the authority to command the entire military to stop firing those cluster munitions, how does the war actually end?
You've hit on the ultimate terrifying danger of fighting a decentralized, dying regime. The traditional diplomatic channels become completely useless. You cannot negotiate a treaty with a silo. You cannot sign an armistice with a rogue regional commander who is fighting for his own survival.
Right.
And while these fractured groups lack the coherent political leadership required to negotiate peace, those individual silos still possess incredibly dangerous hardware. They still have access to ballistic missiles, attack drones, and cluster munitions. They can continue to inflict massive, indiscriminate damage locally, even as the broader nation-state collapses globally. It transforms a conventional war into a chaotic, multi-front insurgency overnight.
And that unpredictability, that specific danger of a cornered, decentralized enemy, it isn't just a problem for the Middle East or European energy markets, because the final section of these transcripts makes it chillingly clear this conflict has direct financial and potentially fatal implications for the United States homeland.
The ripple effects of Operation Epic Fury inevitably reach American shores, and they do so primarily through the shift from conventional state-on-state warfare to asymmetric, decentralized terrorism.
Let's look at the intelligence briefings on this. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard recently testified before Congress regarding the fallout of these operations. She reiterated what we've been discussing: Iran's conventional military power projection, the submarines, the coastal radar, the large-scale bases. It's largely destroyed.
Yeah.
However, she warned that the regime itself, however tattered and siloed, remains intact but degraded.
And we have to understand the strategic implication of intact but degraded. Because their conventional options fighting ship to ship or jet to jet are gone, they will rely entirely on the options they have left.
Exactly. Gabbard released the 2026 Annual Threat Assessment of the U.S. intelligence community. It's a dense 34-page document, and the primary conclusion regarding the homeland is incredibly alarming. The intelligence community assesses that the most likely terrorist threat to the U.S. homeland right now does not come from a highly coordinated 9/11-style team infiltrating the border. The primary threat comes from U.S.-based lone wolf offenders.
We need to define the mechanism of a lone wolf threat. These are individuals who are already inside the country, often citizens or legal residents, who consume and take inspiration from foreign terrorist ideologies.
The threat assessment specifically notes that foreign terror networks use sophisticated online propaganda that actively exploits overseas conflicts. They use the deeply emotional imagery from the war, like the situation in Gaza or the strikes in Tehran, to fuel radicalization.
Yeah.
They don't need to smuggle weapons into the U.S. They just flood social media channels with tactical guidance, encouraging vulnerable sympathizers to conduct localized, low-tech attacks using vehicles or easily acquired firearms.
It is asymmetric warfare in its purest, most insidious form. When a nation-state like Iran loses its conventional military, it inevitably leans on its proxy networks and the cheap, highly effective tactic of radicalizing individuals abroad.
Right.
You don't need to build a billion-dollar submarine if you can convince one radicalized person with a rented truck to attack a civilian center in a major American city. The psychological impact is immense, and the cost to the state sponsor is essentially zero.
And the transcripts note, it's not just Iran's direct proxies looking to capitalize on the chaos. While groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda have been significantly degraded in the Middle East over the last decade, the intelligence indicates they're currently building steam in Africa.
That's concerning.
They are capitalizing on local conflicts and the distraction of the global powers to rebuild their networks. The report notes this requires continued, intense vigilance from the U.S. Africa Command, or AFRICOM, which is based out of Germany. The threat matrix is just constantly expanding.
And managing a globally expanding threat matrix requires an immense, continuous allocation of national resources.
Right, which brings us to the actual literal cost of this war for the American taxpayer. The financial cost is staggering. According to the broadcasts, the Department of War is requesting an initial $200 billion supplemental funding package from Congress just to continue the current fight.
$200 billion.
And Secretary Hegseth noted that number could easily move higher depending on how long the operations last.
We need to contextualize what that money buys. It reflects the grim reality that modern warfare is incredibly expensive. Dropping 5,000-pound smart bombs, maintaining persistent satellite and drone surveillance over an entire country, and keeping aircraft carrier strike groups deployed globally costs billions of dollars a week.
Yeah.
You are constantly burning fuel, expending multi-million-dollar munitions, and wearing out the airframes of your jets.
But when we talk about cost, the financial numbers pale in comparison to the human cost. And the transcripts grounded this entire geopolitical discussion in a very harsh, very permanent reality. 6 U.S. service members were recently killed when their refueling plane crashed over Iraq while supporting these operations.
Yes.
And to honor the specificity of the reporting we are reviewing, I am going to read their names.
It is absolutely vital to remember the individuals who are physically executing these missions.
They are Major John Alice Kilner of Alabama, Captain Ariana Sino of Washington State, Tech Sergeant Ashley Pruitt of Kentucky, Captain Seth Koval of Indiana, Captain Curtis Angst of Ohio, and Tech Sergeant Tyler Simmons, also of Ohio.
Their loss is a profound tragedy, and it underscores the inherent, often overlooked lethal risks of maintaining this kind of forward-deployed operational tempo. Aerial refueling, connecting two massive aircraft traveling at hundreds of miles an hour, thousands of feet in the air, often at night, is incredibly dangerous, even in peacetime. In a combat theater, the risks multiply exponentially.
And the risk isn't just in the air. The broadcasts point out that the threat to American personnel is expanding on the ground as well. Iran, in its desperation, is increasingly treating U.S. diplomatic outposts in the region as legitimate military targets. They are specifically eyeing the U.S. embassies and consulates in Baghdad. Senior officials quoted in the transcripts call this fairly unprecedented.
It is a blatant violation of international norms, but it perfectly aligns with the actions of a desperate, siloed regime. If they cannot hit a U.S. military base because the air defenses are too strong, they will strike at whatever softer symbols of American presence they can reach.
Let me try a different analogy here to summarize this dynamic. It's less like hitting a hornet's nest and more like we just blew up the corporate headquarters of a massive illicit franchise business.
Okay.
The U.S. and Israel successfully destroyed the CEO's office, they seized the bank accounts, and they knocked the main distribution warehouse offline. The top-down corporate structure is completely gone.
I follow you.
But all the local independent franchise owners, the proxy militias in Yemen or Lebanon, and the radicalized lone wolves sitting at a computer in the U.S., they still have the recipes. They still have the equipment. And now they are operating completely unsupervised, without a corporate boss to rein them in, making them entirely unpredictable. We have to pay $200 billion just to try and board up the windows of every single store in the world.
That is a remarkably accurate way to capture the current phase of Operation Epic Fury. The initial structural demolition of Iran's conventional military capability was largely successful. But the containment of the decentralized fallout, the franchise owners, to use your metaphor, is proving to be vastly more complex, expensive, and enduring.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does all of this mean for you, the listener? We've unpacked an incredible amount of heavy, complex information today. We started by looking at the battlefield blueprint, understanding the mechanics of how the U.S. is dropping 5,000-pound bombs to vaporize mountain bunkers, while Israel relies on deep human intelligence networks to systematically dismantle the regime's leadership.
We then tracked how those specific, localized military strikes triggered a massive global energy domino effect. We looked at the extreme fragility of facilities like South Pars and Ras Laffan, the mechanics of the LNG supply chain, and how a threat to that chain resulted in an immediate 30% spike in European gas prices.
Which in turn forced historical, panic-driven diplomatic pivots. We saw European nations, driven by pure economic survival, deploying their navies despite massive domestic political blowback. We saw Gulf states declaring their trust in Iran completely shattered, moving toward a unified Abraham Accords 2.0 military alliance.
All while the Iranian regime itself fractures internally, dealing with thousands of citizens actively defying them, their own security forces collapsing in fear, and a complete vacuum of concurrent leadership at the top.
And ultimately, we brought it all back home. We looked at how the destruction of Iran's conventional military forces have pivoted to asymmetric lone wolf terrorism, costing the U.S. billions of dollars and, tragically, American lives. In a hyper-connected world, there is simply no such thing as an isolated conflict.
No, everything touches everything else.
What starts as a drone targeting a single boat hidden under a tree in Iran ripples outward with terrifying speed. It spikes the cost of heating your home in December. It impacts the inflation of the goods you buy. It forces your government to authorize massive new military spending, and it raises the terror threat level in your own hometown. Understanding these massive geopolitical dominoes is crucial for grasping both the reality of the global economy and the state of your own national security.
Which leaves us with a critical, lingering question to ponder as we watch this conflict continue to unfold in the coming weeks and months. If overwhelming military force successfully dismantles a 47-year-old oppressive regime, but the immediate cost of that victory is decades of global energy instability, spiked inflation, and a dark, unpredictable new era of decentralized, leaderless proxy terrorism, did we actually eliminate the threat? Or did we just force it to take on a brand new, invisible shape?
It makes you realize that when you step into the murky diagnostic landscape of global warfare, sometimes the cure is just as complicated and potentially just as dangerous as the disease itself.